And your name, sorry? Thank you.
Zoom elevation and progress.
Can we begin?
Yep.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good morning, almost. Sorry for the delay. It's and actually, you know, this delay speaks very loudly to what we're talking about tonight. The market's gone through a lot of changes in the last couple of months, and for the last year and a half, really, Addie and I have been focusing on lead generation and a little bit of lead conversion because the market's been just popping along, and there's been no reason for anyone to really try too hard. You know, the hard part was just getting the inventory. The houses were selling themselves, but things are a little bit different now. And I know all across Ontario, markets have changed a lot. And so what we're trying to do, you have to excuse me just a minute. There's a 22-second delay between the time I speak and it actually comes out on the computer. And it really throws you off when you hear yourself talk like that. So what we're trying to do with REMarkTO, real estate marketing, and for the next 7 weeks or 7 months is to try and get back to basics. Because for the last couple of years, a German Shepherd could sell a house. Let's face it, it wasn't hard to do. But the way things are now, you have to be a little bit more careful. You have to be a little bit more skillful, and there's a lot more to the business than there used to be. Or it's going back to the way it really used to be. Tonight, Jacqueline Tanner's with us. Jackie and I have been working together for almost 24 years now, and we were talking earlier about buyers, agents are starting to lowball offers. You have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to help sellers identify proper price when you're pricing. And it's a lot harder to do your job as a real estate agent. But because of that, it's a lot harder to get out of bed sometimes. So we thought the ideal start would be to go right back to the very beginning. And we're really lucky tonight because we have Rick Sergison with us. And Rick is going to help us understand why we do what we do Because if you don't understand why you do what you do when the times get tough, you're just simply not going to do it. Well, thank you, Rick. Yeah, this is Rick.
I'm seeing myself there, but that's a delay.
Yeah. But if you don't know why you're doing what you do, you're not going to get out of bed and do it when the times get hard. And the times are getting tougher. And there's still lots of opportunity. There's lots of people buying and selling houses. There's still lots of money to be made. But if you don't come at it with the right approach, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to stop. Personally, I love a slow market because in a slow market, I make more money because I get out of bed and I work every morning. But a lot of agents just simply don't do that. So tonight, Rick's going to guide us through the steps it takes to try and find a way to get started. Thanks so much for coming tonight, Rick.
Okay,
I'm sorry for the late.
Oh, no, that's fine. Good. Okay, and we'll kind of get started really about talking about this market. It was interesting because my daughter and I were having lunch or dinner just before we got started, and we got talking about the change in the market. Now, Danika's looking at it at a completely different way because she's looking at it from the law aspect. Being a real estate lawyer, she's now seeing the end result of what our spring hath wrought. And it is interesting because I know that there are deals that aren't closing now. You know, the lottery's over and everybody that won figures they're safe and secure, but I know there are deals that aren't closing. So as much as the spring market may have looked like a German Shepherd could sell any houses, I hope they didn't, because if they didn't cross T's and dot I's, there have deals that are going to be in jeopardy, and there are a lot of deals in jeopardy. I was at an agent meeting, training session last week, and somebody said, well, yeah, but I've got a buyer and now the property's underappraised. And, you know, the seller's not willing to negotiate or renegotiate. And my attitude was really, really simple. And if the prices had kept going up between the time they bought and the time that it closed, was the buyer going to pay more? I don't think so. So we're in a different market. We're in a very challenging market. And the opportunity is there, though. Now, one of the things, if you've got somebody in that situation, yes, it's a time to go and talk to the seller and say, hey, here's the situation. That doesn't mean the buyer should be paying less, but it might be an opportunity where we might look at a second mortgage if we have to. I've got two right now that are still being put together. Certainly in one case, my seller's I've already had that conversation, that because it has gone down in value and he's more than willing to hold a second mortgage to make it work. So we've got all sorts of different things that we're going to have to start adjusting to. We're going to have to start making changes so that we can overcome the differences in the market. I was talking earlier on this afternoon, too, with a broker manager, and we got talking about some of these transactions that are in jeopardy. And it's something that we have to adapt. It's something that we're going to have to go back and look at some of the old ways of doing it. We're going to have to start looking at blanket mortgages and things like that. So we've got to refresh ourselves with some of those processes that we haven't used for years. So those changes we have to look at. What we want to talk about a little bit tonight, though, is where are we at as agents? And I've seen something happening that that kind of concerns me, in the sense that we've all got this experience that we're doing open houses, and gee, we're not getting 50 people coming out. We got used to that. We kind of liked that. Oh, let's have an open house and we get 50 new potential buyers. I'm having open houses now, and I'm getting 5 people come through, or 3 people come through. Okay, but here's the thing that we have to look at is the opportunities there. It's interesting that those 3 or 5 people that are coming out are better buyers than the 50 that came out in February and March. And it's interesting because we say, oh, the buyers are all holding off and all the buyers are pausing and everything. A great portion of them are. But those that aren't realize the opportunity, and what I find really interesting right now, is that most of them are coming out and they're not working with an agent. I'm seeing that all the time. And I give them every opportunity. I tell them, if you're working with an agent, I don't even care if you're signed up. I'm not going to steal somebody else's business. That's not how I work. But if you would be working with an agent, to buy this property ready, please put their name and brokerage down, and if I need to talk further, I will call them rather than you. And 4 out of 5 times, nope, not working with anybody. So I kind of begin to wonder, okay, is it the buyer's attitude that we've got to look at? Or is it the agent's attitude we've got to look at? Because I'm sensing a lot of agents in the coaching and training that I do, they're frustrated, they're changing, and they don't want to change. And you see that in the listings. And this is what I was talking to this manager about, was that he actually had an agent go and show a property that was listed at $399.9 and phone the listing agent to say, hey, I'm going to be putting together an offer. And the agent said flat out, my client won't take less than $475. Excuse me. You're listed at $399.9, and your client won't take less than $75,000 over asking? And I see a lot of this going on Facebook, and I see a lot of agents trying to justify that. And here's the deal. There's a great opportunity now. We can get all of the agents or all of the buyers that got locked out of the market in February and March. The market went beyond them, as I say, the lottery, and they got locked out of the market. You can get back to them and say, hey, the market's unlocked. You can buy again. Great opportunity. It may not last forever because a lot of those sellers were buyers that have already bought and they have to sell. There's opportunities there. But here's the challenge. Before I would show a buyer a property, I would call, first off, I wouldn't show them anything a dime over what they can afford. But I would call each and every agent before I showed the property and say, listen, if I show your property, and if my buyer wants to buy it, put in an offer, is your seller willing to take full price or less? You might as well find out now. No sense wasting a lot of time, because not only does that affect our attitudes, it affects our buyers. We take them out and show them, they fall in love with it, but they can't buy it for $75,000 more than their budget. But there's a great opportunity, because there are a lot of sellers that don't have a choice. They have to sell. And if they don't, they should get out of the market for now. So, but we want to talk about a few things, and I've given you some handouts here, and we'll, I'm sure, post them somewhere that people can get through. And I'm not going to go through all of the steps that we have to succeed. I really want to focus on really the real estate that's between our ears. What's going on up here? And that really starts with your attitude. Now, first and foremost, we have to look and say, is attitude a choice? So, let's get this. Okay. Is it a choice that you make? So, that's what's really going to determine. And someone will say, well, you've got to start with your big why. And we're going to talk about that. But here's the problem. If you've got a bad attitude, your big why is going to be way off kilter. Your reason for doing something. So it's got to start with your attitude. Now, attitude isn't everything, but it's the biggest part of everything. There's a great book by John Maxwell, The Difference Maker, and it's all about attitude. So, has anybody read Man's Search for Meaning? Okay. Perhaps one of the greatest books that's ever been written. Viktor Frankl was in a very, very unique experience and had very, very unique qualifications to be able to make something out of it. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Germany in the 1930s. Viktor Frankl is also Jewish. So if you put that equation together and go Germany, mid-1930s Jewish, that might pose a little bit of a problem. Okay. Viktor Frankl had the opportunity to escape the Nazi concentration camps 2 weeks before he was captured, but it would have meant leaving his family behind, and he was unwilling to do it. Viktor Frankl went to the worst Nazi concentration camps and survived. Part of why he survived was because he was a doctor. They could use him. When he survived, though, when he was finished, he put together Man's Search for Meaning. A little bit of a tough book to read in some ways because it tells about life in the concentration camps. But it was interesting because what he realized and discovered was that the difference between those that could survive and could have survived but didn't was generally in their attitude. And he said when people gave up, when people had, one thing that was in a situation was that people would think, okay, we're going to be freed by Christmas, or we're going to be freed by New Year's Day. And what happened was those with those expectations, if they were that set on it and it didn't happen, he said you'd see the light go out in their eyes and two weeks later they'd be dead. Those that survived, I mean, some had no choice. They were led off the trains right into the gas chamber. That was it. They had no choice. But for those that had the choice, how they chose to deal with things made a difference on whether they survived or not. Sadly, his big why, his thing that kept his attitude going, was his family and his love for his family and wanting to get back to them. And unbeknownst to him, they all perished within a few weeks of the start of that process. They were dead long, long, long before he was ever freed from the camps. So anyway, as he says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Things get tough. Things change. Frankly, I hated the February-March lottery. I had people, I was out 8, 10 times and we were still losing because I wouldn't let them grossly overpay. So fortunately right now, I don't have a whole bunch of buyers that are in trouble. But I hated that market. I negotiated a deal last week and it felt great. I was actually negotiating on a transaction. And they came back and signed back and we signed back and we put it together. But boy, did it ever feel good. So there's the upside to it, but how we deal with it, how we choose to deal with it is going to determine how we survive it. Anybody know what this is? GIGO. Exactly.
What's that?
This is a technical term. Garbage in, garbage out. This is what they used to say in the early days of computing. And someone would say, oh, well, my computer isn't working. Look at this, what it's giving me. And the response would be, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. What you put into the computer is what's going to come out. Well, it's interesting because it can also mean this. How you look at it. You can look at it and say, this is garbage. Or you can look at it and say, this is great. And we, again, have that choice. What are we going to put into our heads makes all the difference. Right now, and I'm going to fault Addie on this one for something, what we keep plastering out there and what we keep seeing are articles on how bad everything is, how desperate everything is. Okay, but let's look at who's doing it and why they're doing it. Why did we have the lottery, as I call it, to begin with? Why did what happened this spring happen? Because of the media. That's the number one thing that factored. And how do you know that? Because as soon as the media said, oh, everything's changing, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It did. What did the government announce that changed the market? Nothing. Out of the 16 points that they announced, one of them had a factor, and frankly, a smaller factor than we would imagine, That 15% tax on foreign investors that has so many loopholes that most of them won't even be affected by it. But if you understand some of those foreign investors from China and Korea, I have a friend I was talking with some years ago who is from Korea and is a business person. And he was explaining real estate in Korea. He says, oh, we have complete apartment complexes that have nobody living in them. And I go, well, why would you do that? Why would you build those? He says, because we don't trust our government with our money. So what we do is we put it into bricks and mortar so they can't take it away. So they're holding their money, even if they're not making a return on it, because they know they could lose it the next day. And you'll have governments that devalue their currency overnight. You wake up, you had $1 million yesterday, and today you only have $500,000. You have what happened in India last fall.
With Modi? With Modi, the $1,000 bill that they took out?
Well, yeah, they basically brought out a new form of currency and said, you can change the old currency for the new currency, no problem. And you're not going to lose any money on it. But the problem is, it has to be in the country. Oh, so everybody that had investments outside the country, those rupees just became worthless. They literally went and devalued every foreign-owned currency if you weren't holding it in the country. So a lot of people were trying to get their money back into the country so that they could exchange it. And they were very, very quick on that. So you can look at what's going on in the world and all of that, but here's the thing. We have a choice of what we put in our heads. And right now, sitting there dwelling on what's on the media is not going to help anybody. Because what does the media do? What's their job? Their job is to sell papers, or in this case, online subscriptions anymore. And if they were just to post the day-to-day things that go on in everybody's life, no one would ever buy a newspaper again. But no, what they do is they go and find the most extreme scenarios, and that's what they throw in front of us. There was an article that was posted that an economist said that the Toronto market could fall by as much as 30%. How did they find that economist? What did they do? Go to an economists convention with 1,000 economists and say, excuse me, quick question, who here thinks that the Toronto market might fall by 5%? 1,000 economists put their hand up. And they said, okay, who thinks 10? Who thinks 15? Who thinks 20? And the hands start coming down until there's one left, where they say, who thinks it can come down 30? And there's one guy still standing there. And what do? Can we talk to you? So we can do an article. Why? Because one economist out of 1,000 says it might fall. But then everybody's going to read that. And everybody's going to go, oh my God, did you read the headline? Problem is, with the public today, we only read the headlines. The body of the work never gets read. So again, what you're putting into your head, you've got to look at that each day and say, what am I doing that's going to enhance what's going on? So everybody remember these? I'm sure that my daughter doesn't. Okay. You do? Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, we had them at school. You made a choice. And every time you made a choice, it gave you a different answer. That's the way it is. Every time you make a choice, you get a different answer. So if you're going to choose great things, you'll probably get great answers. So, but this is, and I actually hate this quote. I hate this quote. There are some quotes like this one that just, they're so simplistic and it just got, The problem is it's true. As Henry Ford said, either you think you can or you think you can't. You're right. It's too easy. It's too simple. Of course. Of course. Can't we make it more complicated? No, that's how easy it is. So here's the first question. Are you good enough? We're coming into a different market. Are we going to sail on what we've been doing? Now, some of us have been around for I've been in August 41 years. Jackie Tanner's been doing it since she was 12, and I've known Jackie since she started. So when you look at these things, we're going to have to change. So a lot of people are just thinking, hey, I'm good. I'm really good. My challenge is, and this is right out of Jim Collins' book, which is a great book. This is the first chapter. Good is the enemy of great. Why would it be the enemy of great? Any thought?
Settle for good and never get to great.
Exactly. We start resting on our laurels. Hey, done 10 deals this year. I'm really good. Okay. But the day we settle for good, you're never going to get to great. And things change. The only constant in life is that things change. And we're seeing that right now. So as far as I'm concerned, the day you're good enough is the day you start to die. Success to me is growing constantly. That's success to me. Everybody has their own definition. But that's my definition of success, is each day getting incrementally better at whatever that is. But that's going to affect your attitude. So, Robert Schuller. I'm a big fan of John Maxwell. If you don't know who he is, I can make some suggestions as to reading that would tell you who he is. What would you attempt to do if you knew you wouldn't fail? This whole presentation actually came out of a session that I was doing. I had about 15, 20 people that we were doing business planning. And when I said to them, you have to aim high, you have to set your goals high, and gave them some suggestions, and then I met with each of them through the following week and went through with their business plan. And every single one of them had a reason why they couldn't aim high. And I was really, really disappointed. So the next session that I had with him, because I had weekly sessions with him, the next session, we were supposed to go on to something else, and I went, no, we're not going there. We were going to go on to priority setting and that from goal setting and business plan, which you'll see later on down the list, which we're not going to deal with tonight. We can do that on another evening. But literally, I left a coaching session with them, and I was so disappointed that all of them had a reason why they couldn't do it. Frankly, part of that was their attitude. They didn't believe in themselves, and what was worse, in a lot of cases, they didn't believe that being a real estate agent had value. And I think that with a lot of them, especially newer agents that haven't been through some of the different times that we've seen. I think a lot of them don't realize what we add in value. It was interesting because one of my clients just last week kind of made a comment about all the money we make, which is interesting. And when I said, okay, but why do you feel your house is worth what it's worth? He said, well, and I said, how about the Toronto Real Estate Board? He went, what do you mean? He said, you are being serviced by the largest real estate board in the world, bar none. We are by far, the largest real estate board in the world. Bigger than LA. Chicago has 3 or 4 MLSs. They have 3 or 4 real estate boards servicing one city that's less the size than Toronto. We're the mega board. But because of the power of us, that affects prices in Toronto. Do you really think that if the real estate board didn't exist, they'd be able to command prices like they do? They wouldn't. But beyond that, the actual social things we do, and actually I'm having a chat with our MPP, Tracy McCharles, happens to be my MPP here in Pickering, but also happens to be the minister responsible for Consumer and Commercial Relations, which means she oversees the Real Estate and Business Brokers Act. And I had sent her some thoughts about the market and how we could improve the market. And in talking to her assistant, one of the conversations I had is, and here's some ideas on how you can improve the real estate industry. And she said, I think maybe the MP might be interested, the minister might be interested in those. So I have now sent her those things and hope to sit down and meet with her just on, some of those thoughts. But we have to look at what we do in adding to that equation, because if we don't keep buyers buying real estate, I'm going to hate to see what happens to this country in 30 years. I know in the past 18 months, 2 years, I've taken at least a dozen couples that cashed in their homes, sold them for $800,000-$900,000, and went out to Coburg, Welland, Peterborough, there's Coburg back there, hi Dave, and went out and bought bungalows for $300,000, $350,000 and took $500,000 tax-free into their retirements. What happens when this generation does not buy real estate? We have to help first-time buyers buy real estate, or this country 30, 35 years from now is going to face a crisis of people trying to retire and not having that equity that we've helped provide. So we add real value to this whole thing. And we have to understand that and value what we do and who we are. And I think the first thing is a lot of people haven't figured that out. They think like we're used car salesmen and, like, hey, I get a lot of money for selling houses and this is a great thing. No, we have a purpose. And if we don't see that purpose, then we really need to sit and evaluate it. But as I say, it all starts with your attitude. So what happened after that session that I had with this group that I was coaching, and I was really not in a good frame of mind, so my attitude really sucked as I was walking down the mall here in Pickering, and I actually passed a store, and it was interesting, because they had this in the window. And I thought, what would you attempt to do if you knew you couldn't fail? Or what would you do if you knew that you had a t-shirt like this underneath your suit? No one else has to know. What would you do if you were Superman or Superwoman? Well, awesome, because then you don't have the limiting beliefs. That's going to change everything to the classroom. And I actually had this on under my suit, and I took off my shirt and tie and suit jacket and said, okay, now if you're wearing this t-shirt, let's hear those excuses again. Let's hear those answers as to what your business plan should look like. I even had one of my people that had come in, and she was all upset and kind of going over and all, what was me and on and on. And I actually had an extra one of these in my drawer. I took it out of my drawer, I threw it at her and said, go in the bathroom, change into this, and then let's have this discussion, because I don't like what I'm hearing. So, now, some people will look and say, well, I'm not Superman and everything else. Fortunately, it was 2 for 1, so I got Batman too. And we all know that you should always be yourself unless you can be Batman. So, now for some people who say, Rick, I'm not going to wear that under my suit or my dress or whatever. I get that. So even if you just get superhero socks, they're good, okay? You can keep it to yourself. So I guess the next question is, anybody recognize this? Anybody read this when they were a kid? Yeah. This is one book I remember, and this is actually, I went through, it's been published for years and years and years, and it's got a dozen different covers. I actually went looking for the cover of my book, and this is exactly the edition that I used to read from. Does everybody know the story? All the big engines were saying, oh no, I can't possibly go over that hill, except for the little engine. Says, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. And of course, what happens is the little engine gets over the hill because of his attitude. It's the only thing that gets him over the hill. So we want to talk about that attitude and start putting great things into your head. So I guess one of the questions is what kind of a superhero are you? Now that seems like a weird question. And when I got this t-shirt and I started down this path, I'm thinking, like anything else I do, I did a bit of research. Do you know that there are 19 levels of superheroes? And Superman's only on level 16. There are 3 levels better than Superman, and I haven't even heard of these superheroes. I'm going, really?
Wonder Woman being what?
Well, she's certainly right up there.
I thought so.
And actually, I have to change this presentation. Thank you for reminding me, because I put her in the wrong category. I didn't realize her whole story, and I'm waiting. I've got to go and see that movie. I hear it's good. So the first category, I've kind of put them into 3 categories to compress things down here. And you'll probably be tired of listening to me before I would go through 19. And some of them you've never heard of. But if we look at how many of us know a superhero, a Superman or a Superwoman, everything they do just good as gold. Doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter what they touch, it just works. We see them. They go in on every listing presentation. They're out in 20 minutes with everything signed every single time. They get it priced right and it sells in 3 days. And we go, oh, they're what are they? Well, here's the deal. If it's that easy, they're either an alien or a god. Comparing yourself to either one is not going to help you. Put them out of your mind. But realize this. Realize that you are seeing their outsides, and never judge your insides by somebody's outsides, because they have their own kryptonite to face. They may show it well, but whether or not what's going on inside them is good, that's for them to judge, not you. So you get the second quote, and this is where a lot of us fall into, which is the Spider-Man, Hulk, Fantastic Four. And these are regular human beings, at least when they start out. They're regular human beings, and then something happens that changes them. I went for years and years and years, and I was just me. And one time I sat down in a seminar that changed everything I've done because of what one specific person said, and that was John C. Maxwell. And he said something, and I went, wow. And it changed everything that I've done. So at that point, I started doing something different, and it went from being just who I was and whatever I could do, and I got bit by gamma radiation or by a radioactive spider or whatever it was. The last category is regular human beings, and superhero people will tell you these people are not even superheroes. They are not superheroes. Batman is not a superhero. He has no superpowers. He's just a regular dude with a few $1 billion, which kind of comes in handy. But he does his business and takes his superpowers from systems and leveraging other people. But unto himself, he has no superpower. So a lot of people can fall into that category. They say, well, I don't have any superpowers. You can still be a Batman and put such great systems together and start leveraging people and be a superhero. So let's look at some things. And this is a little bit of what we're talking about here. Okay, we all have a natural ceiling of achievement. We go by our gifts that we have. But here's the challenge. If you only go by the talent that you have inherent, which we call entrepreneurial, you will hit a ceiling that you can't get above. And what we tend to do is we tend to hit that ceiling, then we bounce around in here, and either we just hang out at the top of it as much as we can, or we crash and burn. How many have seen real estate agents that came in, and wow, were they ever great? They were superheroes. They could touch things. They had all the contacts. Everybody loved them. And then you look and say, but where are they now? And for those of us in this marketplace, I could name right off the top of my head at least 5 people that everybody knew. And you haven't heard from them for years. They didn't make it. There's a reason why, and one of the reasons why is because they never developed, they never grew. All they did was run with a great entrepreneurial talent. But unless you change something in what you're doing, and when do you need to do it? Now is a great time. Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Second best time, today. But part of what we have to look at is we are going to have to adapt to survive in the new market. And to say it's a new market, it's really not. It's an old market that's been repeated very many times. But we're going to have to adapt and make changes. How our attitude fits into that will determine how successful we are. Okay? So, once we get something new, a new way of doing things, a new system, maybe a new technology, but once we adapt and get something better, we grow, then eventually we will break through that ceiling of achievement, that kryptonite, but you're always going to find a new one. You're always going to find a new one. So at some point, you're going to have to change again. Because either you're growing or you're dying. There is no in between. There's no stasis. We can't stay the same. So this is where we have to look and start thinking, okay, what can I do to evolve? What can I do to improve? And that, to me, is success, is finding that way, that difference. And one of the things that we want to talk about, once we've got our attitude in place, is why are we doing what we're doing? Some people say start with why, which is a great book. Happen to have it. This is a great book. Start with Why by Simon Sinek. I mentioned it there on the sheets. Okay? I would argue that you want to do one thing before you start with why, and that's get your attitude into a place where you're ready to look at your why. Now, I know initially Dave and Addie were talking about, oh, we'll spend a whole session on defining your why. There's a problem with that. Each and every one of us has a different why. And the why that you have today will change and evolve. My why for a long time was Danica and her brother as a father. But they got to a point where they grew up. They're successful on their own. They don't really need me anymore. My why had to change. And I went through a process that was very brutally painful. I realized one day I didn't have a why anymore. Led me to a heart attack 5.5 years ago. Yeah, I'm lying on the table. They're putting stents in my heart, talking to the surgeon. You're awake when you do that. But I had the heart attack. And he looked at me and said, what do you do for a living? I told him. He said, gee, is it that stressful? Because this is stress. It's killing you. It was interesting because he kind of commented, and of course they've given me the happy pills. Has anybody ever had the happy pills where they make you feel like a toaster inside and you're all warm and like, oh, this is great, this is fun. And I'm lying on the table watching them operate on me on the TV screen. And he said, you might notice some people coming by looking at you. I said, yeah, I figured it's just your phenomenal service, Doc. He says, actually, no, according to our hospital records, you were born January the 1st, 1990, or 1900. And I said, oh, cool, I'm going to have my 112th birthday in another couple of weeks. This is awesome. And he said, no, it's interesting, though, because your outsides look pretty good, but your insides look about 111. He says, whatever you're doing, you've got to stop it. So I did. But I wandered for 3 or 4 years, and I mean literally wandered for 3 or 4 years without a why. I got up every day, but I kept looking up and going, why? Why did you bother getting me up today? So it was not a good time in life. But I figured it out. One of the things is doing what I'm doing. So that's where this all really started to kick into gear. So I don't do stress anymore. My doctor thought that was hilarious. He says, oh yeah, you're doing really, really well. What do you do? I don't do stress anymore. He says, no, seriously, he said, I don't do stress anymore. I don't do what I don't want to do anymore. I have clients, I don't want to work with them. Guess what? I say, sorry, you're not worth the stress. So occasionally we have to look and say, there's some people that just aren't a good fit. And I go find somebody that will work with them better than you and work with them. Refer them to somebody. So when you get to it and start with your why, it's a great book. But you go into it with the attitude, I am going to change. I am going to improve my life. Now, interesting, I have this tutu here. Danica thought I was going to put it on. That ain't happening. I wouldn't fit into it anyway if I want. I do fit into the Batman and the Superman t-shirt. The tutu I'm not going to fit into. So, here's the deal. What does that have to do with a why? Well, let me show you a few things, and then I'll tell you a story. I don't know which camera's on working.
Which one do you want?
It doesn't matter. You just point me to one. That one. Okay. So I'm going to show a couple of pictures. I hope you can see them. And then I'm going to pass them down. Don't usually work to a camera, but... And here's another. Here, I hope you can make those out.
Just keep it there for a second.
Keep it there. One Mississippi, two Mississippi. Got it?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. These are probably not in exactly the right order, but if we remember these images, I'll tell you a little story about a dear, dear friend of mine who happens to be a client.
What is that?
Okay?
Yep.
I can give you these and you can scan them in and add them. It was interesting, and I think Gary probably heard this story because we were talking about it just this week, and when we were out looking at a house, Patty and Jim and I mentioned to her, and this was just after my training session on Thursday that Gary was at, I mentioned to her, hey, you were my star today. And she went, what do you mean? I said, well, we were talking about your big why. What did those pictures have to do with this? I'll tell you a story about a dear, dear friend of mine for many, many years. Our families have grown up together. My son Adam danced with all of their children. Danica and a couple of the kids went to school together and are good friends. So, Patty, who is 50-ish, I think she's maybe a touch older than that, but she's my age group. She woke up one day without a why. And it's funny because when I mentioned to her that she had been my star, she actually told me how deep the story was. And I didn't realize to the depths of the story. But she was also in that stage of getting up every morning, not wanting to get out of bed, and going, why am I living? Patty had a situation occur at one point. She was traveling, she got very sick, actually collapsed, and in collapsing hit her head, her face, onto a sink and was in for major repairs. The disease was long-lasting, so she was in a really rough space for a long time. And then after that, she was massively depressed. And she started getting this idea. She started with an idea that she'd always wanted to do, was to build schools in Africa. So she did. There's one thing that being with all this dance that Patty was really good at: making costumes, sewing. So what she started doing was making tutus. Now these are not generally what you would have for a 5-year-old's dance recital. You go to the dollar store and get a little tutu that you wear. No, these run several $100s into the thousands of dollars. She makes stuff for the National Ballet. She makes stuff for big, extravagant productions. She does a lot of very, very intricate, expensive work. And she doesn't take a dime for it. Her husband, fortunately, works for a major corporation. They're financially fine and set. Every dime that she makes from making these tutus, and she's in demand, she has to turn down business. Other than what she pays to employ people that help her make them, goes to her schools in Africa. And she's built several schools, just making tutus. That's the only reason And she does it like 10 months of the year. And then they go and will often go to Africa and take stuff and see how the schools are coming. And during one of those trips, her why became greater. Because at that point, all they could do was take small children and orphans and get them into schools. They get to be a certain age, though, where they can't help them. They can't take them to school. It's too late. And most of these people, most of them, and they predominantly are looking at women and girls. Most of them are on the street and surviving the sex trade. They had a thought. We sew. We make these tutus so that we can fund the schools. Their next project was to start training those same girls. And the pictures that you see that I showed you, that's a girl that they picked up off the street. She was too old to go into school. But rather than leave her on the street, they taught her to sew. And the following pictures, she's modeling one of the wedding dresses she made, and now she runs a business manufacturing and selling clothes. And now they've multiplied that. So that's their next project. Their why got bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's what those pictures have to do with this tutu. This tutu gave Patty a reason to live. It became her big why. And it funds even bigger whys. So that's what can happen when we start latching on to things and saying, hey, hold on a sec. There is a reason why I'm here, and there's a reason why. Now, for some people, it may be real estate. But for some people, it may be real estate that funds their why, and they may be completely unrelated. Initially, Patty's why didn't relate to making the tutus, other than the tutus financed the why. Eventually, the why combined with the tutus in sewing. Now, the people over in Africa that they've trained aren't making tutus, but the same talents that they could pass on are what are now making those people into entrepreneurs and independent business people. So, we have your entrepreneurial, and then you have your purpose, going beyond. So, when you've got your superpowers and you think, hey, I can do better, I can do better, I can do better, then you have to figure out a way to do it. Okay? And Batman has one thing that most of the other superheroes, any that I'm aware of, don't have. What does Batman have that the other superheroes don't have?
Robin.
Wrong.
Oh.
That's the number one answer. But here's the deal. Robin's more trouble in most cases than he's worth, okay? It always seems that Batman has to go save Robin. Robin goes off, you know, hot-headed, and Robin's going to do and be Batman, and Batman's going to go, okay, kid, here I go again. I got to go in there and save you. The one thing that's different is
Alfred.
Alfred is Batman's coach. Alfred is that voice of reason. Alfred is that person who makes Bruce Wayne think things through. He holds him accountable. He's that balance. And in fact, the last Batman movie I saw, and I don't remember which one it was, I've seen most of them, there's a couple I haven't seen. But in this one, Alfred has to leave. Bruce won't listen to him anymore. He's saying, Bruce, this is not a good idea. This is not the way to do something. And Batman has become uncoachable. He won't listen. He's going to do it his way. And Alfred leaves. Now, I won't ruin the rest of the story because eventually Bruce Wayne, Batman, smartens up. But that's for another day. Anyway, so interesting. I was at a session, and it was interesting because that's the one quote that stuck out with me, is that a real estate agent, an agent without a coach, is really just a for sale by owner. It's interesting that we are going to protect these people and we are going to help them through this process, and yet no one helps us through the process. Something to think on. Anyway, I'm a Hulk. I wish I was a Spidey. I do have Spidey socks, and I have my Spidey backpack here. People always talk about that I stole my son's Spider-Man backpack. I can tell you right now, Danica, did Adam ever own that backpack?
No.
No, it is
I'd be
my
more likely
backpack.
to.
What's that?
I said I'd be more likely to.
You'd be more likely to, and you didn't own it either. That is my backpack. Okay? So, I'd love to be Spidey. I'm a little bit more of a Hulk. I used to be even more of a Hulk. I'm down about 40 pounds since my heaviest. We'll talk a little bit about that too. But that is my gamma radiation. That is my radioactive spider bite. That's what changed everything that I do was the day I started reading. And I watched John Maxwell on stage about 20 feet away from me talking about reading. As Tremendous Jones says, the only difference between you now and 5 years from now is the experiences you have, the people you meet, and the books you read. So, I'm a real advocate of reading. Here's some interesting facts on reading. Anybody want to guess what the average CEO of a Fortune 500 company reads in a month? One? Any other? Right answer. An average CEO of a Fortune 500 company actually reads 4 books a month. That's why the executive summaries are becoming so popular. See, most books are actually about 20% content and 80% filler. They tell the same thing over and over again in a slightly different way because you're not going to pay $50 for a book this thick, but you will if it's this thick. But executive summaries take 4 or 5 books and compile them into one book, so it has the key 20% in each book. So an executive, a busy CEO, can read and glean that information much easier. So they're very popular. Any idea what the average number of books from the president on through the mailroom is? Any guesses?
40 years.
That would be nice. Less than 4 books of nonfiction between the day of their last day of formal education and the day they die.
I'm doing much better. I'm doing much better.
Awesome.
Is that per year or total?
No, total. Most people, after the day they leave high school, college, or university, will not read 4 complete books that would help them improve anything between that day and the day they die. If you wanted, and these are US statistics, sorry, that's what I got, but I don't think we're that much different, at least in this aspect. What do you think it would be to be in the top 1% of all readers in the United States? Any? 1 book per month. If you read 12 books in a year, that means you are reading more than 99% of the rest of society. But people who read only 7 books a year earn, on average, 230% more than those that don't read. That's probably a good why as to why you might want to start reading. So that's what my bat cave looks like. And yes, I read books about books to read. Okay. And where did I get all that information? From a book. All those facts and figures I just threw out came in one book. It's called Tuesday Morning Mentoring by David Cottrell. And I'm reading away. I'm like, wow, these are cool statistics. And I'm not a high detail person, so I'm just, hey, wow, those are great. So that's why I encourage, how many people attend driving university? Dave Chalmers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. I can tell you because I've got a computer in my car that tracks all this stuff. I average about 45,000 kilometers a year. I can also know by pushing on the button, it says I do about an average of 49 to 50 miles per hour. And if I take the two and put them together, it means I'm in my car for about 900 hours a year. You can get a PhD in 900 hours of studying. So what are you listening to while you're driving along?
Audible.
Yeah. Audible is a great source. Okay? Just go to the library. It's free, and get downloaded things that you can actually download stuff for 2 weeks. It's time download. But while you're driving, while we're all driving, because we do, we can use that time. And it's funny because you say, well, I'm concentrating on driving, so I don't. No, your head is still working. You are still absorbing that information, even if you don't realize it. In fact, you're in a great state. You're called an alpha state when you're focused on something else. You're actually in one of the best states that you can actually learn. Now, it's not the same as reading. People say, oh, well, if I listen in the car, do I have to read? 2 different parts of the brain learning 2 different ways, but okay. So, I guess that becomes the question. If you were a superhero, how would that change how you're thinking? How would this change in the market really affect your attitude? You look and go, oh, okay, I can do that. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. Interesting, if I had a session and I said, send me all your kids and I'm going to tell them what they can't do, no one would send anybody. But what day does it change for us? What day did we stop thinking, hey, I can be the Prime Minister of Canada, the President of the United States? We wish that Donnie's parents kind of dissuaded him on that one, I think. But anyway, I shouldn't get political. That's my opinion. But we don't. But we start coming to this reality that we can't do things. So I think the first thing we have to look at is, how do we grow? How do we pick our why? How do we find our why? It's not even a matter of picking it. How does it come to us? Where do we start to look? And that's a discussion that goes inside. That's where you go to your special place, maybe a cliff overhanging the lake, or into a room. John Maxwell has a thinking room. He thinks every day. Specifically, it's in his schedule to think every day. And he goes, and he has a special room with his favorite chair, and he set up the room perfectly for him to think, because he's a thinker. He's also written over 85 books, and is the top renowned leadership guru in the world, as according to Inc. magazine and a number of other organizations. The difference is when you hear names like Stephen Covey and Jack Canfield and those names, they're famous because when they write a book, they do a book tour. And John writes a book to get it out of his head and put the information out there, and then he goes back to work. So there's a difference there. And we keep saying to John, please go out and do a book tour, because no one knows who you are. So anyway, so things like, would you cut your commission if you were a superhero? We got asked that an awful lot. And we're not going to talk about commission rates, etc., because we're all with different brokerages. But if you were a superhero, and you knew that you had a Superman t-shirt underneath your suit, and somebody said, will you cut your commission? What would your answer be?
No.
No. No. I'm worth it. Now here's the challenge in that last statement. I'm worth it. Are you? This is why improvement comes into play. This is why you have to get better. Because you have to decide, oh, here's the excuse. I love this one. Yeah, but if I don't cut my commission, I'm going to lose half my business. Really? Great. Let's look at the numbers. If I have 10 clients and I'm doing 1 to 1.5%, it was interesting, as a broker of record, I got to see all of the deal files. I got to see, we're talking about superheroes, we're talking about those supermen and superwomen, and we look at them and go, oh, they're wonderful. I got to see what their deals looked like. Guess what? A lot of them, they weren't making this. No wonder they got the listing. They went in, threw themselves on the ground and said, what will I have to do to get the listing? Oh, do it at X%, which is less than every, oh, absolutely. And they'd walk out in 20 minutes. Of course they would. They just undercut everybody. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I used to see those deal files and I go, what? They're not making any money. But they look good. They win all the awards. It's interesting. Look at people that get awards for volume, as in commission dollars, GCI, versus units sold. That's an interesting one. They can do 1 million units at $100 a piece, and frankly, they're not making a living. So that's an interesting one. But if I have 10 clients at 1 to 1.5%, or I have 5 clients at 2.5%, and for our purposes, I'm just using these figures, use whatever you want, 3, 4, 5, 6. Don't want Rico going, you talked about commission rates. Not making any judgment, but if I get a better commission rate, fill in the blank there for whatever you want. Sorry, this is set up for one brokerage. You have less expenses. You're going to cut your expenses in half because you have half as many clients. At least your cost of sales, and we can talk about the difference of that. But we're going to cut our expenses because we don't have to pay as much to service 5 people as we do with 10. So that's a good thing. And we have more time for family, for living, or even, the big bad words, lead generation. If you're not servicing a multitude of clients at a fraction of what you should be getting paid, then go spend that time and go find more people that will pay you what you're worth. But again, we go back to that worth, that value statement, because the other thing that you have to do is you have to improve and you have to prove your UVP. Does anybody know what UVP is? Unique value proposition. What have you got to offer?
Or USP as well, unique selling proposition.
Unique selling proposition, USP. What are you worth? And that's where we start to ask ourselves, okay, am I a Lada or am I a Lincoln? Now, not to say that there's nothing wrong with a Lada. There's a reason why they're out of business. But they are the same thing. They're vehicles. What do? They get you from point A to point B. It's all a car or a vehicle is. It's a method of transportation. But there's a huge difference between the two of them. So I'm not saying that one is wrong. I'm not making any judgment on anything, but here's the deal. You get to set what you are. You get the choice. But when you say, I'm a Lincoln, first is believe it, but secondly, prove it. We have to prove our value. So often what happens is people say, oh, well, I'm different. How are you different? Here's the challenge. Right now in the Greater Toronto area, there are 60,000 plus real estate agents. There's about 50 on the Toronto Real Estate Board. That does not count Oakville. That does not count, okay, Hamilton. Somebody may say that's beyond the Greater Toronto area. I don't know. I usually include it. Doesn't include Brampton Board. Does not include the Durham Real Estate Association. Add them all up together, we're over 60,000. We are the most over-serviced city in the world for real estate. So here's the problem. Either you have to figure out your difference in how you do things better, or you are a commodity. What's a commodity? What types of things are commodities?
They compete on price.
That's all they compete on. A commodity, a barrel of oil is a commodity. Wheat is a commodity. Pork bellies are commodities. Gold, silver, they're all commodities. What is a commodity is that something that only has one thing, price. Scarcity. Right now, are real estate agents scarce? No, not at all. So here's the problem. If you become a commodity, you only get the lowest common denominator. And the challenge in the lowest common denominator is anybody that is loyal to price is not loyal to you. They will replace you the second somebody else comes and says, oh, I'll take a quarter point less. I'll do it for X minus a quarter. The challenge is once you do that, you're never going back with those people. You're never able to go back and say, well, things have changed now and I'm raising the commission. No, because they're loyal only to price. So it's okay to say no to somebody and say, listen, I'm sorry, you mistook me for a Lada dealership. I'm a Lincoln dealership, and I'm happy to send you to a Lada dealership. I can refer you to one. There's no judgment there. It's just I'm not that Lada. Yeah. So there's the other extreme of it. A commodity is a bus. It's for everybody. Doesn't cost a lot. Gets you where you want to go. And then there's a Bugatti. That's one of the fastest cars in the world. And also 250,000 to 300,000 US to buy that puppy. So there. Commodities trade at the lowest price. You have to be different. You have to establish your UVP. So anyway, this session goes from here into some goal setting and some planning. And rather than get deeper into this, really wanted to kind of set it there. And where I want it to go is first and foremost